Hi, welcome. Thanks for joining us today. I'm Stephen Rhoades. I'm joined with my colleague Jonathan Meade. We're with Synergy Technical. Jonathan, how are you doing today?
I'm doing well, Stephen. How are you?
I'm doing well, thanks.
Good to hear. Good to hear.
All right, we're excited to show you how to unlock the power of automation using Power Automate. We're going to talk through a few introductory concepts around Power Automate, explain to you what it is. Then we're going to show you a few demos about how you can get started with it. And then we'll talk a little bit more about some real-world examples of how we've seen Power Automate used with our clients. And then finally, Jonathan's going to round it out with a few expert tips and tricks. So Power Automate is a cloud-based automation workflow service from Microsoft. It used to be called Flow. It's part of the Power Platform. And it allows you to basically automate your tasks and processes and improve your day-to-day productivity. It uses what we call event triggers, and we'll show you some of those today. And it also has the ability to connect to over 1,000 pre-built connectors to software as a service applications as well as Microsoft applications. And it is what we call a no-code, low-code solution that's really meant to be accessible to your IT pros and your business analysts. So you don't really have to be a developer to use Power Automate. So with that, Jonathan, how about we head over to some demos?
Sounds great. Okay, so here we are in Office 365, and from here I'm going to jump over to Power Automate. So you should see it. It will show up under your apps here. If you don't see it, you can just simply click Explore all your apps and search for Power Automate. Let's go ahead and select it here. All right, so we have a lot of options here. We're going to start with Create, and we're going to start with just creating from scratch, so you can see kind of what it takes to build these Power Automate flows. And then we'll get into, Stephen will touch on some simpler and more automated processes to help you create your flows. So I'm going to do Create. There's really three types of flows. There's automated, instant, and scheduled, and we're going to do an example of each. I'm going to start with an automated cloud flow. And all that means is that the flow is going to start from some trigger, some event. You get an email, a new document is added to SharePoint, a new list item is added to SharePoint, a record is added to Dataverse. Any of those kind of events will trigger the start of this flow. So let's just call it, so what we want to do is we want to build a flow that's going to notify someone when a document is added to a SharePoint document library. So we'll just say new document notification. And you can search for a trigger here, but we're going to just skip that, and we'll do that from the Power Automate designer. Here we go. So I'm going to hit Add a Trigger because that's our first step. And so here's all the triggers. And what we can do is we're just going to search for, we talked about using the SharePoint document library, so I'm just going to search for SharePoint. And what we want to do is we want to do when a file is created. So I'm just going to select that. So once I've selected that, you'll see over on the left side, on the left panel, this is where we're going to configure this step. So first thing we need to tell it is what SharePoint site we're looking at. And so I'm going to hit the drop down. So it will remember recently viewed sites, or if that doesn't show up, you can hit enter a custom value and type in your SharePoint URL. So let's just pick the retail site. Our document library is just going to be documents. And then down here, this trigger is just going to be checking on intervals, and the default is every 3 minutes. And for testing here, let's just make that every minute. So there we go. So there's our first step. All right, next thing we want to do is we want to add another step because we want to be notified. So we want to send an email when a file is created. So we just hit the plus button to add a new action. And this time I'll just search for email. And there's Office 365 Outlook, and there's send an email. So that's what we're going to pick. Who I'm going to send it to, we'll just send it to me. Let me just get my credentials here. And subject, we'll just say new retail document added. And then in the body, so what I want to put in the body is I'd like to know what the file is, and I want to know who created it. So I'll just say, say file name and put a colon. And then, so what I can do is I can actually add dynamic content from other steps in my flow. So if you look over here, you see these two little options. I can insert an expression. We'll come back to what that does. But the little lightning bolt here is add data from a previous step. So if I select that, then I'm prompted here. So I can actually pick any of the items from my previous step. So if I search for file name, so file name with extension, so now I will actually get that file name and actually see that in the body of my email. And we just want to know, the second piece of information we want to get is who created it. So just be created by. And again, I'll hit the option for dynamic content. And I'll search for created. And for created by, you can see these different pieces because the user is basically a record that includes their name, their email, their department, job title, etc. We just want to get their name. And then in the advanced parameters, if you want to set things like BCC or CC, or if you want to include attachments, you can configure that here. But we'll keep this simple and just have the basic email with who created it and what the file name was. So there we go. Those are the two steps we need. Let's just give our Power Automate a title. And let's save it. All right, our flow is saved and ready to go. So let's just come back out. And now let's jump over to SharePoint, and let's just put a file in that document library. Go to the retail site, documents, and we'll just create a Word document real quick. All right, I've created my file, so let's just refresh here. All right, so there's our document. Let's go back over to our flow. All right, there we go. We can see that our flow is run. So just a couple words here on the flow history. So the history will stay there for 28 days, and then it's going to be removed forever. So if you need to keep a longer term audit trail of stuff, you have to add steps to your flow to write that. If I click in here, I can see all the details of my flow. And if I expand this, I can see all the inputs. I can open up the outputs. And as well on email, I can see everything that was added there as well. So when you get into troubleshooting, or you're getting things populated with the wrong value, you can go back and look at your flow history, expand these steps, and you can see exactly what went into creating that step and what the values were. All right, so that's the first example. We're going to go back home here, and we're going to go do create again. Next one we're going to do is what's called an instant cloud flow. And instant cloud flow starts whenever you take a specific action. So it can be manually triggered. It can be when you pick an item in an Excel list or an item in a SharePoint document library or SharePoint list. That action will actually trigger this flow. So what we're going to do is we're going to pick this manually trigger flow, which is a button. So this you can run from the desktop, but it's also nice, and I'll show screenshots of using this on a mobile device. So what we're going to do is we're going to create a Power Automate so that we can, if we're running late for work, we can notify our boss that we're running late. And so we have a very quick way to do that. So we're just going to leave. So if I click on the manually trigger workflow, we can add an input parameter. So I'm going to add a number, and this number is just going to be number of minutes late. And then again, I'm going to add a step, and again, we're going to add send an email step, so Outlook. And if I don't see what I'm looking for, I can hit see more, and we want to find send an email. There it is. So let's just say my boss is Miriam. Go. And I'm just going to say, for here, just say I will be, instead of a fixed number, what we can do here, again, use that dynamic content. And so from our trigger step, I'm just going to pick that number of minutes late. Okay, I'm going to say that. Minutes late this morning. And body will just say, so sorry. And there we go. And then we'll just save this. Let boss know I'm running late. Turn my caps lock off here. Here we go, and let's save it. It's good. So I can just hit this run button right here, and that will trigger it, and it'll just give me, just prompt me for my connection, and then I can type in here just the number of minutes late, and that will trigger and send my boss an email. So that's nice on the desktop. On the mobile, there's a mobile Power Apps. So let me just pull up what that will look like. So here I'm in my Power Automate mobile app, and you can see under Instant Flows, there's my flow to let the boss know I'm running late, and you can just click that button, and then it will give the prompt here in a number of minutes, and just click OK, and that will trigger the flow as well. All right, the last example, let's jump back to Office, is we're going to create a scheduled flow. So scheduled flow, that's just what it sounds like. This is a flow that's just going to run on a schedule that you set. So let's just go ahead, let's just jump in and skip the steps here. Oops, we forgot our recurrence. So here's the schedule. Let's say we wanted to run once a week, maybe on Mondays. And we're going to run this in the morning, so let's say 9 a.m. So what this one's going to do is, what we want to do here is we want to remind our team every Monday that their timesheets are due by the end of the day. So we have our recurrence. It's going to run once a week on Monday morning. And then we're going to add a step here. Certainly you could send an email again, but we're going to do something different here. We're going to use the Teams connector. And what we're going to do is we're going to post a message on our team. So post the message in a chat or channel. And so we can say we're going to post as the bot, or we can actually just post as the user. We'll just pick the user, which is Adele in this case. And we're going to post in a channel. And the channel is going to be in this Mark 8 project team. And then the channel is going to be, let's just pick the design channel. And in the message, Please submit your timesheets. The end of the day. All right. So we need to do there. Just call it. Let's call our flow timesheet submission, timesheet reminder. We saved it. So if we didn't specify a start time, it's just going to trigger kind of right away, which is what it did. Normally, you could set that timer that first time so it starts on the first Monday that you wanted to run. So if we jump over to Teams real quick. And let's find our team. So this is the Mark 8, and it was the design. And there's our Teams post right there. All right, so that's the 3 ways from scratch to create a flow. Now Stephen's going to show some alternative ways and probably simpler ways for you to get started with Power Automate.
All right, thank you, Jonathan. I'm logged in now as a different user, and I want to show everyone how Jonathan showed how we can start from scratch doing automated instant scheduled flows. I'm actually going to show you how just right from the home page of Power Automate we can build flows really quickly using things like Copilot and templates. So I'm going to jump over here into Power Automate, and we're on the home screen here, and you can see I've got this screen here that's asking me I can enter in a prompt, and this is actually going to use Copilot to generate a flow for us from scratch. And so just by typing in, let's say I want to start an approval when an item is added to a SharePoint list. I hit generate, and it's actually Copilot is actually building the flow for me. So I don't have to know anything about triggers and actions. You can see it just created a trigger for us for that when an item is created in SharePoint, as well as an action for the approval. I can hit next, and it actually shows us that we're logged in to or connected to SharePoint and the approvals app. And I hit create flow, and boom, just like that, we've got the flow created with the trigger and the approval action. You'll see on the right hand side we have the Copilot panel open, and here's where we can continue to use Copilot, and it tells us that I can use it to add an action, explain what something does, or add a condition, and also check. It's telling us to check to make sure that the parameters of the flow are correct. I can see that I'm connected with those green check boxes, but here I can even enhance this flow. So I haven't even touched anything in the interface. I'm just using Copilot to do this, and I can say add an action to send an email if workflow is approved. And so without knowing anything more about the conditions and the controls needed, it's going to actually build out that condition control. And there we can see we have now an action to send an email if the approval is done. So you can see we've got some invalid parameters. At this point, this is when I would call Jonathan to explain to me what I need to do. So I'm not going to save this flow, but you can see how quickly we can just get in and start using Copilot to generate the flow for us. And it's also a great way to learn how to use Power Automate. So that's Copilot. We're going to jump back to the Power Automate. Again, I'm not saving that. I want to show you really quickly how with templates you can get started as well. So I'm going to go over from the home screen on the left-hand side to the templates. And there's a ton of these templates you can use. I'm going to look at the top picks and see how we can use this one to save a message in Teams off into OneNote. So I click into that template, and so I open this up, and we can see that it's signing into, the flow is going to connect to both Teams, OneNote, and to Office 365. We've got the green check marks telling us that we're connected to all these services. I hit continue, and I need to pick here which notebook it's going to go into for Miriam. And so it's going to load up. I'm going to actually choose Miriam's notebook, and then we get to choose a section that's going to go to. So she's got a section called messages where we're going to want to save these. So I've got those selected. I just hit create, and just like that, it's going to create the flow for us. So it says here the flow is ready to go. It's turned on. It'll run when it gets triggered. So I'm going to say I've got it. And here we are. We can see it hasn't been run yet. We're at the main flow page, details. We'll come back and show you how this works once we create another flow from a template. So let's go back to our templates. The other thing we want to show you, going back to our top picks, is how you can create a planner task from a channel post. So it's this one down here. This allows us to post something in Teams, and with the keyword to do, it's going to let us then automatically create a planner task inside a planner. So here we can see it's going to connect to both Teams and Planner. I hit continue. I need to choose what group or what team to use. So we're going to choose this Mark 8 project team. We've got to choose the channel of that team, and this is going to go into the go-to-market plan. And then we're going to choose the group for this plan, which happens to be that same Mark 8 project team. And then finally, we need to choose the actual plan, which happens to be this Mark 8 project plan. So I've connected to the team, the channel, the group that underpins that team, and then the actual plan that we're interested in. I hit create, and just like that, it's going to create our flow for us. So you can see there's a potential problem with the flow. We can hit this flow checker here. And we can see there's a warning here that it hasn't been triggered successfully in the last 28 days. So I'm not sure why it's doing that, Jonathan, but apparently, obviously it hasn't been run because we've just created it. But let's see how these work. So we just created these flows really quickly with a few clicks of the keyboard. I'm going to go over here into Teams, and let's show you how this works now. All right, so we're in as Miriam in her new Teams experience. Let's wait for this to refresh. We're going to go over to Teams, and I've actually got that go-to-market plan team. It's pinned up here, that channel that we care about, where we hooked all this up. It's actually pinned up here, and we're going to put in a post here. So here we have some prior posts. So we're going to start a post. And remember, we need to type in to do. So we're going to put a message in here, and we're going to use the keyword to do. To do. And we're going to say schedule kickoff meeting. And obviously we could put some other details in there, but basically when I hit that post, the flow, it should pick this up, and here we can see it just picked that up from Miriam's workflows, and it created a task. So I can click on this view task, but I want to show you it's over here in this Mark 8 project plan. And there it is, schedule kickoff meeting was added to this planner board. It's a really, really cool way that you can then kind of use your channel posts and use this flow to integrate with Planner very easily. If we go back to that same post, you'll see, remember we created that other flow that's trigger based, or rather it's kind of run on demand. We can actually then find that flow and send this message. So here's the post, right? We can hit the three dots under the post, and under more actions, here's that save a message to OneNote that flow that we created from a template. So we click on that. We can see that it's executing the flow. I could even put a note in here if we want. So I can say, let's say this message was to ensure kickoff scheduled. So I hit submit, and now that's going to actually send that message to that OneNote section that we talked about. So I even have a handy View Note button where we can actually jump over to Miriam's OneNote. And there's that message. So just like that, we can see how we can create these flows very quickly using templates as well. All right, excellent. Well, those were great demos. Thank you, Jonathan.
Thank you, Stephen.
Let's talk a little bit more about how we've seen Power Automate used in the real world. So Jonathan, what are some examples of how we've seen it used with our clients?
Yeah, so first, Stephen, first thing that comes to mind is data ingestion or data extraction. So we saw we could use a SharePoint list trigger, but we could also use an email trigger. So when we receive an email to a certain account and say it has an attachment, we could then trigger that flow to say take that attachment and save it to SharePoint document library if we wanted to do that. Or say if it was a data file like a CSV, we could expand our flow and actually extract that data from that attachment and write it to say a SharePoint list or a Dataverse table. And conversely, going the other way, we can also use Power Automate to take data from our system and send it somewhere else. So again, we could be reading from SharePoint list or Dataverse table, and we can run on demand or run on a schedule, take that data, we can generate a CSV table in Power Automate, and then we could send that to a vendor, to their email account, or maybe to a third party via SFTP connector in Power Automate.
Very cool, very cool. I know we've also used Power Automate with notifications. So when we've had approvals go out, we've used Power Automate as a way to kind of set reminders for those, as well as alerts for when a new entry gets created in things like a SharePoint list or Microsoft Dataverse. We've also used Power Automate in conjunction with Power Apps. Can you give us a few examples of how we've done that?
Sure. So we haven't shown that, but in Power Apps you can actually have it trigger, have it call a Power Automate. So you can make a lot of processes, expand your apps, and say, instead of triggering, I can say push a button in Power Apps, and it can start an approval or send someone an email message or generate any sorts of additional processes we want to leverage from our Power App.
Nice, nice. So lots of ways that we've seen Power Automate used, again, in the real world. I think at this point, Jonathan, I think we've got a few other tips and tricks that you wanted to show us.
Yes, absolutely. Okay, so I'm back in Power Automate here. I'm going to go into an existing flow here called Project Approvals, and let's hit the pencil here to edit it. And let me just close the Copilot panel. So, the flows we did so far are really simple and straightforward. So there's not a lot of confusion about what's going on. But this flow is a little more complicated. And you can see as I add items, it says, get items. And if I add another step that gets items, it's going to just say get items 1. So at a glance, when I'm looking at my, going back and looking at my Power Automate, or someone else is going to work on my Power Automate, they're not really going to know, what I'm even talking about, what's going on with these steps. And so what the user is going to have to do, the designers, they're going to have to start clicking into each step, seeing what's going on, what list they're looking at, and so on. So the key is for any good Power Automate is to rename these steps, right? So instead of get items here, we're looking at the asset manager from a list. So maybe we'll just say, maybe get asset manager. All right, we go down to get items 1, right? That's a terrible name, doesn't tell us what's going on. In this case, we're getting something from the project list. So let's just say we're just getting project. Maybe we're getting the project title from that SharePoint list, right? So already it's much clearer what we're doing there. Go further down here. There's a compose step. So anytime you add create a formula, to create a custom formula, it's just going to say compose. And again, it's not telling us what it's doing here. So if we look at the input, and let me click on it, you can see we're using a function here, UTC now, which is just getting the current date and time. So instead of just saying compose here, why don't we rename that and say, let's say, get current date and time. So now, even at a glance, looking at our flow, we can see exactly what's going on at each step along the way. Next step, to even further enhance the the documentation within the Power Automate are comments. So let's click on this get current date and time. So we have the title there, so we know we're getting the current date and time, but we don't know what we're actually doing with it. And so again, to figure out what we're doing with it right now, we'd have to go work our way through the flow to figure that out. So a nicer way to do that is if we hit the three dots here, we can just add a note and say we're just using the current date and time, or we'll just say, let's just say using this to check against last modified date of item. There we go. So now we have a note. So again, when I'm looking through this flow after 6 months after I built it, or someone else is looking at it because they're managing it, for this step I can see right here there's a note. Click on it and I can see what we're doing with that current date and time. So I highly recommend, once you get beyond 4 or 5 steps, to definitely document your Power Automate by renaming the steps and then adding notes where applicable. So kind of carrying on with that, to further kind of make this more usable, we can also use what's called a scope. So I'm just going to insert a step here, and I'll just type scope, and there we go. So what a scope does, it's really going to, the Power Automate is going to treat that as one unit of work. And so what I can do is I can take these steps and I can just drag and drop them into the scope. Let's move that up. Right. And then we just talked about it, let's rename our scope so we know what this is. And let's just say this is issue, or this is a project, right? So get project info, right? So we know what this step is doing, and when this item's created, it's going out to these other SharePoint lists to get the related information, and then we can kind of roll up our scope. So now again, very easy to read. I can see, as I had, I could add a whole bunch of these scopes, so I can see what each one is doing, and then I can work my way into them if I need to see what's going on within the steps within that scope. So let's exit out of that one. And let's go back to home here and my flows. So the third tip I guess I want to talk about is error notifications. So when your Power Automate fails, and they will fail, right now a notification will go to the flow owner. It may not be right away. Your flow owner may be a service account, so no one's even seeing that email. And the user that submitted it, they'll have no indication that anything went wrong. So what we need to do is we need to kind of enhance these flows, have better error notification. So on the second one here, this issue tracker submission, let's go in and edit this one. Right, so it's a very simple flow. The issue submitted, we get the related account manager, and then we notify team that there's a new issue. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to insert a step. We saw that compose step, so I'm going to use that. And I'll hit the little function because we're going to insert a function. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to divide here. So I'm going to divide by 0. So we're going to take 3 and we're going to divide it by 0, right, which is undefined. So that should give me an error. So if I save it, and we can ignore that little warning. Let's just hit test, which will just, basically testing will just rerun a prior instance of this flow. We'll run that. Right, there we go. We can see it failed. Once a step in the flow fails, you'll see that everything after that stops. So this email step never ran. So the team never even knows an issue's been submitted. So what we're going to do is we're going to fix this so that we notify people when this fails. So, oops, I went back out. Let's go back in there. All right, so let's add a step. I'm going to add an email option. Send an email. And what we're going to do is we're going to email, use our dynamic content. And if I type created, and I want to go to the issue submitted, so I want to get the created by email and let them know that your issue submission, oops, if we can spell there we go. It's called flow, failed. So here we go. So we're letting the person who submitted this issue, let them know there's a problem with this Power Automate. And what we can do here on the advanced parameters, we could add a BCC here, and we could then notify the IT team as well. So we've notified the user that this has failed, and we also have notified the IT team. All right, so if we look at our Power Automate, you can see after notify team of new issue, then this step looks like it's always going to run if it's successful, which is not what we want. We want this step to run if something wrong happens. So let's go back into this. And if we go to the settings, you can see here this run after step. So if we hit this, we want this step to run our error notification. We want that to happen only if it's timed out or skipped or failed, not when it's successful. So if this fails, like our compose step, that fails, so this step's not even going to run. But since this did not run, it got skipped, that's going to trigger our error notification. So if we save it, and let's test it again with the one that we just ran. Right, you can see we got our error, so the notify team, that step never happened. But now we can see that our error notification, that step did run. So we have notified the submitter that something happened and the IT team. And then if we go back, let's look at our flow history. We can see that here's our last run. So it says it succeeded, right? Because it went through, it found that step, that error step. So it actually looks like it succeeded, but I really like that to say it failed, because in reality it failed. So let's go back and edit our Power Automate one more time here. I'm going to add one more option. Add action, and we're going to find a terminate step. There we go, terminate. So all terminate step does is it stops the flow, and you can tell it the status that it stopped at. So succeeded, failed, or canceled. In this case, I want it to be failed because our flow actually really failed. So let's save that. We can run it one more time. Just use the resubmit against the last instance we ran. There we go. So now it shows that it failed. So it finished, it sent the error notification, and then it set the flow as failed. So when you come in here and you're looking for those failed instances, it's very clear which one failed, and then the IT team or whoever's managing this flow can go in and see what the problem was. So Stephen, that's what I have for the tips and tricks.
Fantastic. Thank you, Jonathan. All right. Well, let's move to some questions, Jonathan, that we've gotten from the audience. So the first one we have is, in what situations would someone need to terminate a flow, and how does this impact the flow's performance?
Yeah, so there's a few scenarios I can think of. Within the flow, you could have a do until loop, right? But for whatever reason, your logic to stop that never happened, so that flow is just going to be running really for 28 days until the flow is shut off. Mm-hmm. The other scenario, which is probably more common, is you have a trigger on a document or a SharePoint list item to say when it's modified, do this, and then in your flow, you're actually updating that same item, so you're going to get in a vicious cycle that's never going to end. So those are two scenarios I can think of where you're going to want to stop that process, because you're going to eat up all the resources on your flow capacity allocation. So it's two scenarios I can think of that.
Okay, great. We have another one here. What do I do with someone's personal flows when they leave the organization?
Okay, so ideally they've either shared that with someone else so that someone else can get into that flow, or that flow is running under a more of a service type account that other people can access. If they have left it, it's running under their account and it's business important and they've left the organization. From the IT admin side, they can take ownership of that flow and take over that and change the credentials and the connections.
Great, great. And then finally, what licenses do I need to use what you guys showed today?
Everything we've done today should be under most Office 365 licenses, your E3, E5, Business Premium, all that should be included. I will note we've talked briefly about the custom connectors. Those require additional licensing. So if you need to use any of the third-party connectors or you're using like API HTTP calls, you're going to need additional licensing. So please feel free to reach out to Synergy Technical and we can help you with the right licensing.
Awesome, great, fantastic. Well, I think that about does it for us today. We'd like to thank everyone for joining us and hope you've learned a little bit about how to leverage Power Automate for your own personal automation and business automation tasks.
Bye, everyone.